You are very welcome to this video, especially if you come from my main channel or from Vlad Vexler chat. I've been asked to take a look at a video that defends a sort of idealized Duginite position. I haven't seen the video. I'm going to react to it with you live and we're going to see what happens. I don't know the person who's made the video. His name is Michael Millerman, except for a small interview I saw with him years ago on the Steve Piken show when Michael was being interviewed about Dugin. I think Michael is an admirer of Dugin, and what I often advance for my audience is the idea of keeping your circle of permissible speech as wide as possible. So we're not going to freak out about a pro-Dugin view, even if we're discussing it in the middle of actions by the Kremlin regime that are so disgusting and outrageous you don't even know where to look or how to tear your hair out. And of course Dugin is implicated up to his neck with that. But nevertheless, we are going to give this a go from our pro-Ukrainian, deeply loving pro-Ukrainian position, but with our reflective political theory philosophical hat on. And I think Michael Millerman is, as far as I can tell, a professional political philosopher. So on we go.
Hi everybody, I'm Michael Millerman. Welcome to my channel. I wanted to make a short video today about the following
Michael
question.
Millerman.
Can you be pro-Russia in the current war without being anti-Ukraine? In my view, the answer is yes for the following reason. There are people who don't know anybody in Russia
see why you think it's yes.
or anybody in Ukraine, and they have absolutely nothing against Ukrainians or Russians. However, they have something against global liberalism, globalism, American hegemony, not because they hate America, but because they hate American global dominance. Some of them might also hate America. That's not what I'm talking about. So you have the following situation. Is it better for there to be a single global hegemon or a few centers of power? Question number one. If you think it's...
That's a coherent question. It's nearly impossible for it to be the case that one asks the question first and then sees how it applies to reality. Not at all. It's only after a certain complex international reality presents itself that you can then see if there is space or if there isn't space to ask that question. So,
if you think it's better for there to be a few centers of power, next question, who could
this is already the problem with starting with the question first and moving on to the world second rather than the other way around.
To oppose the dominance of the United States globally? Well, probably the best bet is some kind of Russia-China axis, some combination. They're not the only countries. There's Iran could be in the equation. There's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There's BRICS. But still, we're just simplifying here, Russia, China. So what would a victory mean for this question if Russia were to win in Ukraine? It would mean the prospects of a multipolar world are greater.
No.
And what would it mean if Russia were to...
No, it wouldn't mean that at all. It wouldn't mean that at all. It wouldn't mean that at all. I mean, for it to mean that, Russia's imperial project has to have a certain degree of substance, a certain degree of stuffing behind it, which really means that it has to have things that it offers, short of, just being violence and delusional, mystical thinking. So we've got to give an account of the ideas that back up that imperial project. Now, it seems to me that Michael's going to think that these ideas are available. He's wrong. There are no such ideas. And the ideas of Eurasianism are vacant ideas. But of course, it's not even important to legislate on this one way or the other. It's rather important to just say that what Michael is saying is predicated on it being the case that this imperial project has something to offer. And if it has virtually nothing to offer except negative things and things that are unsustainable, right? Like, there's no way that Russia could control Ukraine because Ukraine's got an anti-colonial movement and it's totally set for generations on not having any ideological Russian control of its culture, of its institutions. So what we've got, therefore, is the opposite. That even if we wanted a multipolar world, the best way for Russia to become a multipolar actor is for this imperial project to collapse, for this regime to collapse, for this war to be lost, for Russia to arise 75 years from now as a power that regionally has something to offer, culturally, politically. And then that conversation could begin. But the idea that an abstract preference for a multipolar world could allow you to jump to the conclusion that you're going to back Russia in this war is intellectually unserious and embarrassing. I mean, I could conceivably say that, yes, I am in favor of all neighbors on my street having an equal say, all neighbors in my building having an equal say in how the building is run, let's say. But if we then admit the reality that my next door neighbor is a murderer, that principle is going to be given at such a terrible level of abstractness, is going to have no application to this situation. Well, if my neighbor weren't a murderer, then I would prefer a situation where everybody had an equal voice in the way the building was run. But that's a kind of, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bicycle. That's that kind of argument.
To lose, it would mean the prospects of a multipolar world are less likely than they would be.
No, it doesn't. If Russia lost, depending on how it lost, it's going to lose inevitably. This is the other point here. Russia is going to lose. The only way it sort of loses impurely, rather than losing purely, is if it starts World War III. Short of that, Russia will just lose. And depending on how Russia loses, Russia may or may not in the future become a kind of power that could contribute to a multipolar world. But a winning Russia would not contribute to a multipolar world. A winning Russia would contribute to a set of extraordinarily unstable escalation patterns that threaten the security of the world.
Totally independently, in a sense, of whether you like Russia or Ukraine, whether you know Russians or Ukrainians, whether you're
totally independently of whether my neighbor is a murderer, I'm in favor of all neighbors having an equal say in how my building is run. Well, the problem here is that one's saying something that is either terribly vague or insupportable. And what's the room in the middle? Where are you going to find the room in the middle?
Pro-war or anti-war. There is one perspective from which you can assess the significance of the war for international relations, for the world order, for the problem one hegemon or several empires, one ruler or several rulers, one globalist force or a few regional blocks.
Just start with an abstract question.
And just in terms of that question, in my opinion at least, it's in principle possible to be pro-Russia.
At what level of generality?
Russia to
if my neighbor weren't a murderer, I'd like to cooperate with them.
Its possibility of saying no to the United States and its allies. I repeat, this doesn't mean you are
but what's the level of that possibility,
in my view, because you may not think that America must extend its reach everywhere globally. There are very patriotic, pro-constitutional, freedom-loving Americans who don't think that America should be fighting wars all over the world and that America's interests have in principle no boundaries and all of that, right? So Doesn't mean you're anti-Russian or pro-Russian. Doesn't mean you're anti-Ukrainian or pro-Ukrainian. Doesn't mean you're anti-American or pro-American. But it does mean that in your view, globalism, meaning a single global hegemon, a single center of power, a single ruler of the world, is less desirable, all things considered, than a few Poles, and Russia and China, in principle, could form some balance of powers, some counterweight to America.
There's not a clear where to go with this, Michael. I mean, the power of the West is spreading with this war. We've got NATO enlargement. We've got exactly the opposite effect of what you're talking about, resultant from Putin's policies. And also, there's a civil war on the ex-Soviet space between something like an imperial authoritarian proposal and something like a modern democratic proposal. Ukraine has taken a side quite well in this conflict, but that conflict is going on inside countries too. I mean, that's the eloquence of the recent Nobel Prize being shared between 3 countries. There's a civil war inside Russia. There's less of a civil war actually inside Belarus. Belarus is more resolved, and the paradigm there is closer to being a people captured by their regime, whereas there's more co-conspiring going on with the
global dominance. What do you think about that argument?
Folks,
is it nonsense? Is it bogus? Is there something to it? Is it possible
you
to
could
separate
get away with
out
that
this
statement
principle of international relations
if you reframed it at a terrible level of abstraction, but then you wouldn't be able to tie it to this war.
Actually being anti-Ukrainian, pro-Ukrainian. You know, maybe the concern is that, look, China and Russia are totalitarian, authoritarian, dystopian, dictatorial regimes, and it's better to have just global Americanism than it is to have any form of Chinese world domination, any form of Russian world domination. I want to leave that question for you to hash out.
So, Michael, I don't recognize a question there. The proposal is so resolutely abstract that I can't dismiss it, even, really, because it needs to say something about my neighbor. It needs to make a series of 3-dimensional claims about my neighbor. If we talk about my neighbor in abstraction from whether he's a murderer or not, then our conversation can be so terribly abstract. It's going to have no bearing at all on the war or on the relations I should have with my neighbor. So that's the conclusion. Thank you very much for watching. We're going to have much more illuminating and fruitful conversations soon. Bye-bye for now.